Hello, everyone. My name is Bernadette Smith, and I'm a keynote speaker and writer. My pronouns are she and her. Welcome to 5 Things in 15 Minutes, my weekly show where I bring good vibes to DEI. That is good vibes to diversity, equity, and inclusion with a little dash of corporate social responsibility. What I found is that there are lots of news stories about what's going wrong in the world and lots of negative data. But there are also a lot of things going right. That's what I like to focus on. I search for stories that we can be inspired by and learn from. My hope is to inspire you to experiment with some of these actions and policies to help you build a more inclusive world. In this week's episode, I'm joined by Baez-Sanchez, she, her, DEI enthusiast, and Anthony Papini, he, him, director of DEI, both at ActiveCampaign. This week, our conversation is about the first Black African to win a Tour de France stage, Barbie's new dolls, inclusion at the Emmy Awards, and more. We'll also be talking about the development of ActiveCampaign's new junior platform certification program. Welcome to the show. I'm thrilled to have you today.
Thanks, Bernadette. Glad to be back.
Yeah, it's great to. So let's get started. I know you're part of the Actively Black Employee Resource Group at ActiveCampaign, Jay, and Anthony, you're the director of DEI over there. I would love to hear a little bit more about this program, this junior certification program.
Yeah, I'm going to turn it fully over to Jay. Just as a matter of setting up, at ActiveCampaign, we continue to think about how we evolve and iterate on our DEI efforts as a core part of the business. And about a year ago, the DEI team said, look, ERGs, we want you to think really critically and focus on two key areas. Employee excellence. How do we support our employees' growth? How do we ensure that we're driving successful career development for folks? And the other area is around engagement with the business. Mm-hmm. How do we bring the DEI voice to our business, to our customers, thinking really critically about how we grow that pipeline and engage employees from across the business with diverse customer representation, and gave that overarching guidance. Mm-hmm. And each of the ERGs have driven that work in a little bit different way. But what Jay and her colleagues did with Actively Black to cultivate this junior platform certification has become truly a template for this work at AC, and the DEI team and our colleagues across the functions. And I'm excited for her to talk about how it came to fruition.
Yes, brag.
About 2 years ago, I joined Actively Black, and shortly thereafter became the co-lead. But when Anthony had kind of shared this initiative for our ERGs, started brainstorming a lot, and I would listen to a lot of podcasts, very much like this one right here, 5 Things of DEI. And I listened to an interview that at the time was the chief officer DEI at General Motors, and how they were kind of taking on certain initiatives, basically thinking about the community and what they can go ahead and do to serve the community. And so I was like, well, what can ActiveCampaign do in that same breath? And so we have a consultants program where we're teaching others how to use the platform. And I was like, well, why don't we make a junior? I would talk to my co-lead, Anna, and I was like, well, why don't we make a more condensed version of that? Kids nowadays, and I'm sure you could probably attest, are not really looking at college right after high school. So it was like, why don't we teach high school kids how to do email marketing? We have the tools, we have the knowledge. And so that evolved into, well, we can go ahead and have other employees and staff kind of join in as well and share their expertise that they have on the product. So stepping out of their immediate roles and maybe being enablement or being behind the scenes and getting project management skills involved. And so we kind of married serving the community and upskilling opportunities for the employees, kind of all in one. And it came together beautifully when we got with Chicago Tech and did this.
Wow. So the partnership is with Chicago Tech. Is that a Chicago public high school? Or can you explain what Chicago Tech is?
I'll let Anthony explain. Go ahead.
Yeah, so My Tech Academy is a school based in Chicago that helps bring STEAM education to students. The predominant student base are students from underrepresented populations, low-income families, and they really make this deep investment. And they've been a longtime partner of ActiveCampaign, and true to form, it's like you have Bernadette. You can appreciate this. This is in your space how things operate. Like you just kind of keep checking in, hey, what's going on in your world? This is what's happening with us. And, we got to figure out how we can work together more closely. And, they've held events at the ActiveCampaign headquarters. We've sponsored some different programs of theirs, but this really represented this shift of like bringing their students, getting this platform certification. And a lot of the students at Chi Tech are budding entrepreneurs. Several of them were like, wait, this is the tool that I need for my business, and not, some sort of play pretend business, real money earning endeavors that these kids are driving. And so it was this, exciting moment to see these students just take a keen interest. And a lot of the facilitators who are used to working with adults who are running their own business and using ActiveCampaign as a platform came away and saying, these, 16, 17, 18-year-olds were asking as engaging, more engaging questions than the adults who are, doing this. And there was a deep investment. So that's just tremendous to watch.
I love that. And so your employees are able to upskill themselves through this work with Chicago Tech as well. And that's so cool. Yeah. You're just creating lots of win-wins, right?
For sure.
Trying to, again, that's fitting for this conversation. There's a lot that is heavy. There's a lot that's serious. There's a lot that, maybe the needle isn't moving as expeditiously as we would all want it to. And so in these moments, it's not that all those things are erased, but it is a moment nonetheless that says, oh, here's a success. Here's how DEI is having an impact on the community, on a company that is invested, on its employees. Just this win across the board. And it's exciting to watch. Now it's going to be fun to see as several other ERGs iterate on this and think about who are the partners in our community that can do this. I don't want to give anything away because it's in the works, but I know a couple of the ERGs are in conversations with community partners to say, hey, we can mirror this. So
I love that. And Jay, I can see the pride in your eyes and in your voice when you're talking about this program. I mean, it must be just a sense of fulfillment to have this as sort of a give back that's part of your job or part of your role.
100%. Anytime you can kind of marry your skill set, and find ways to develop your career, but also serve your community. To Anthony's point, I was like, the students enjoyed it very much. They had so many great questions, so much talent that walked in there. But beyond that, even the teachers that accompanied them and all the questions that they came with and what they walked away with, it's like in saying like, while they're like, we trusted the process. But having seen how much commitment we went into putting it all together, they really wanted to kind of move forward. And it piqued interest, in other schools and other, organizations that were like, hey, maybe we can build and team up with you guys and make an extension of this as well. So it's beautiful to see what came out of it, but what's to come is even more exciting.
Yeah. Well, we'll have to have you back in a year or two to share the ripple effect. So
wait, I have to just add one other piece. I mean, because this truly, I've been doing some variation of DEI work for 22 years now. And I've worked with a lot of really remarkable people in the higher education space and the nonprofit space and the tech space. And what strikes me is Jay is one of these individuals who just, without hesitation, with visionary strategic foresight, said, "Oh, I see the strategic direction that DEI is platforming and ran with it and innovated and owned it. And I think that's a huge testament to her. She's this remarkable thought leader. It is a joy to work with her, to iterate, to think with her. I always welcome our conversations. And I think that this is exactly how this work should transpire.
I love that.
Thank you.
Yay, Jay. It's inspiring to me. And I think that for folks listening or watching, and if you have ERGs whose role is more right now about connection and building relationships and finding common ground, that's great. But when you're looking to tie your ERG or your BRG to the business objectives, this is a great model to look at, because that's ultimately provides such great value across the board. And it sort of shows how DEI can be systemized and how it can really just elevate the entire organization. So thank you for inspiring our listeners and our viewers today, guys. All right, folks. So let's get into this week's 5 Things story. So I wrote this week about how, this is the biggest news from last week, was about how Vice President Kamala Harris is now the presumptive Democratic nominee for U.S. president. And if elected, she would be the first woman, the first Black woman, and person of South Asian descent.
Yeah.
And so I'm pretty excited about this possibility. A lot of folks I know are, but I think it's naive to think that everyone is excited. And I was having a conversation with a client last week, and they shared that they are having a hard time hearing the negativity, talking about a DEI pick. And they asked me if I would hold space for those conversations about the anti-woman, the anti-Black, misogynoir that's being said about Kamala Harris. And so I just wanted to remind folks that we have to create space for all of it. And even though this is a good vibes show, I want to make sure I call that out as well. And I'm wondering, how's the conversation going at ActiveCampaign?
Yeah, we're a global company, and I think that part of it is that we need to remember that we have a lot of our colleagues who are abroad and have a very different perspective. Certainly, U.S. politics has global repercussions, but maybe have sit differently with the news coming out of the U.S. and have concerns and perspectives in a different way about what it means for democracy, what it means for a globalized workforce. I think it's a dangerous precedence to set this notion of like, well, we have to, treat all sides equally. We have to make sure that everybody has a voice. I think the distinction is that individuals are entitled certainly to their own opinion, but what doesn't have space in a company that is global, that has a diverse workforce, is divisiveness or hate. And so if your rhetoric is showing up with excluding people from the conversation, with taking away individuals' rights or access to be themselves, then there isn't a place for that. And that's not political. That is about equity and inclusion and belonging at a core. And that is a global message. And we've been, driving with that, and truly, this is I know a lot of people. I've gotten into several intense conversations with folks across my career, and it's, I think that a company in and of themselves, if they don't have sort of a political advocacy arm and operate apolitically, then the conversation is really about that. How do we ensure that everyone has a sense of belonging? Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, I think that it's just really important if folks to acknowledge that hate, and acknowledge the negativity and create a space for discussion if people want it. And they might not, and that's fine. But to at least acknowledge it. And, it doesn't have to be a whole big thing, but it is a contributor to at least acknowledge it can contribute to psychological safety.
Agreed.
I totally
All right.
agree.
All right, well, let's get into this week's 5 things. So, in the spirit of firsts, like potentially Kamala Harris's first, here are this week's stories. They're all firsts of some kind. So, the first story is about Indigenous actresses Lily Gladstone and Callie Reese, who have made history by their first primetime Emmy nominations. The milestone marks the first time Indigenous women have been nominated for acting nominations. I mean, finally, I think all of these stories fall into the category of finally.
I feel like I say that, I do say that often. However, when it comes to like actress Callie Reese, who, she's broken a lot of barriers, not just in the Indigenous community, but the LGBT community, and in sports beyond acting. So yeah, finally is definitely the word I would use, and much well deserved. I'm like in this community as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wholeheartedly agree. And as a fan of True Detective, I thought that this season was phenomenal and brilliant. And so it's heartwarming to see remarkable talent be recognized finally.
Absolutely. The second story this week comes from Mattel, which Mattel has been in 5 things a lot, mostly because of Barbie's inclusive dolls. So they have 2 new inclusive dolls. They have a blind Barbie and the first Black Barbie with Down syndrome. These are part of the 2024 fashionistas line. That's a word I never say and probably won't say again for a long time. So the fashionistas line. But what I love about this is that they collaborated with advocacy groups. They wanted to make sure everything was accurate. And it's so important to help kids feel represented.
Yeah, that piece about these dolls being developed in collaboration with the communities that they represent, I think is a huge item of note. Especially in disability spaces, too many times that this speaking for, not speaking with the community happens. And so, Mattel got it right, and not a moment too soon. It's a great addition. This representation is going to have huge impact for kids, again, across the globe, to see themselves reflected in these dolls.
Truly,
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sorry.
No, I say truly. I was like, I think this is huge. I'm like, and especially, I'm like, they, as you mentioned, they continues to make push diversity. I'm like in all their products. I'm like including, last week when you mentioned the Uno cards. I was like, and I'm like, for those who are colorblind, I'm like, and so now having, I'm like these dolls that, you can go in and have one that represents you. I was like, I think we all remember when in our younger years, I was like, where there were, I'm like, it was always the same doll and we were always still excited, but now to have one that looks exactly like you, I was like, and you feel that, that extra positivity. I was like, I'm like in that representation. I think it's huge. I'm like, and it's amazing and it's lovely to see, honestly.
Yeah, and I might as well mention this week's call to action now, which I'll bring up again later. But watch the Black Barbie documentary on Netflix if you haven't already. It's really entertaining. It's really educational. It's inspiring, amazing voices. And it's not just about Black Barbies specifically, mostly is, but some other similar Barbies as well that have represented other identities. So it's a really, really great documentary to check out. Okay, the third story this week comes from the Paris Olympics, which will have a historic milestone as U.S. track and field winners will receive prize money for the first time in 128 years. So this is prize money from the International Olympic Committee, and they're awarding $50,000 to gold medalists in 48 athletic events. So the U.S. provides their own prize money for winners outside of just track and field. So this comes directly from the IOC. And, these athletes are sacrificing so much. It's equity. This is equity.
And I think sometimes while we know the Michael Phelps of the sports and the LeBron James, sometimes we fail to realize that there are a lot of amateurs that are in here competing and they don't have the endorsements or the sponsorships that come with being a professional athlete. So I definitely love when we can compensate them, and especially when they have a gold medal. I mean, this is amazing. This is definitely getting us where we need to be. I think, or where we needed to be for a long time.
Yeah, and let's face it, it's not, we need to have not just track and field getting some money. So that's sort of a story for another day. Exactly. We need to expand the pot there. But another shout out, check out the Sprint documentary limited series on Netflix about track and field athletes. It's a good one. Really good one. If you like that kind of thing. All right. So a fourth story this week is from Canada, where General Jenny Carganen was appointed as the first female chief of defense. So the huge milestone in military leadership in Canada. And they're about to expand their defense budget, and she's going to have a bigger role than ever. And, again, finally.
Yeah. I think politics, I know there are a lot of strong and divisive opinions on military, on war spending budgets, but that piece around representation and ensuring that you have this competent leadership at the top is key for any country. And bringing a woman identified general into a leadership role for a country's defense is a step in the right direction. You're going to certainly get, I imagine, a different perspective than you have had for the history of service in that role. And it's telling. Again, one of those wow, really, this is the first time. But I think that promoting gender equity, especially in a space like the military, is so key.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. I feel Canada is definitely making a huge statement when it comes to gender equality in these roles. And I love that this is happening kind of at the heels of Kamala Harris's announcement. So, if we're leading by example, Canada's definitely doing that.
They sure are. And you know what? Regardless about military spending, we're all going to have different opinions, as you said, Anthony, but people are going to join the military. That's something that people aspire to do. Great. That we need that protection. And also a woman is going to make a huge difference in leadership in the culture. Right. And so there's a cultural piece as well, I think, potentially. And the psychological safety that she could potentially create more of, potentially. So, I think that there's a lot of opportunities in addition to representation that could shift here. Yeah. Okay. And the last story this week comes from the Tour de France, which recently finished. And Eritrean rider Biniam Girmay made history as the first Black African to win a Tour de France stage. So he won in the third stage. It was a huge moment. He was the only Black rider out of 176. I have goosebumps just.
Literally, me too. I mean, I'm when you say those numbers, I was could you imagine? I was I'm putting that aside, that's just a huge feat in itself, but to be then the only Black, I was individual is huge. And something I like to say, just in sports in general, I feel like sports blurs the lines a lot for a lot of our different individual races, and literally allows us to display our talents as they are. So I was but obviously him being first, again, I think the theme here today is finally. This is amazing, because then it inspires others to follow suit.
Girmay has had a long history of being. This story actually was, Bernadette, before it was in your newsletter, I was familiar with this one because Eritrea and Italy have had a really intense history with each other. And he, a few years ago, won the Giro d'Italia, their biggest bike ride competition. And, again, was the first, was the only Black rider. And just this powerful testament that they're a reminder that there are so many spaces where, in addition to being at first, are they only, and what that means about continuing to broaden representation. I hope next year the story that comes out of this is a marked increase in the number of African riders that get to participate in, whether it's Giro, whether it's Tour de France, because we have to keep moving that needle, whether it's in sports, whether it's in a corporate setting, whether it's in education, any context.
Yeah, absolutely. And so all this week's stories were about firsts. They were stories of finally, yes, we're finally here. And it just, I know that it seems in some cases like, just trite in a way, maybe, but we have to celebrate these milestones because we want to make sure we keep moving forward. And it can be easy to, especially this year, especially the past couple of years, to feel like we're regressing, but we're not at all. We keep going forward. So I'm excited.
Pushing for progress.
That's right.
Gotta do.
Sometimes there's little steps back, but ultimately we are on the right path. Well, folks, it has been really wonderful having you with me today. How can people get in touch with you if they would like?
For me on LinkedIn, linkedin.com/in/Anthony Papini. Always appreciate those connections.
Same for you, Jay. And we'll make sure those. Yeah, we'll make sure that gets put in this week's show notes as well. And this week's call to action is to check out the Black Barbie documentary on Netflix. It is really fantastic. Great storytelling. And I absolutely loved it. So check that out if you haven't already. Anthony, Jay, it has been a real treat having you this week. Thank you so much. Hope you have a great week. And folks, I am going to be going on vacation for a couple of weeks. So there's not going to be a new 5 things in 15 minutes until later in August. But enjoy the rest of your summer or the next few weeks. And hope you all have a great week. Take care.
Thanks, Bernadette.